There are huge proven oil reserves in Canada, bigger than what Russia, the US, or even the UAE have. All of this could be making the country a ton of money, but for decades it's been missing out on billions from its oil, all because trading with its southern neighbor turned out to be not quite fair. But since 2024, Canada's finally kicked off a new era in oil trading thanks to a project worth over $30 billion. Canadian black gold is now headed to China, where they're more than ready to make up for everything that's been missing for decades. How did this affect the U.S.? Well, just imagine. China now worked with the top oil partner of the United States. And this sounds like a full-blown disaster. All in all, this new Canadian project has set off a bunch of changes, and that's exactly what we're going to tell you about now. As of 2025, Canada has discovered oil reserves totaling 170 billion barrels. Some of the reserves are located in the province of Saskatchewan, and some are in the coastal areas of Newfoundland and Labrador. However, the importance of these discovered fields for Canada is minor because there's Alberta. This province can definitely be called the country's oil capital because it holds about 95% of all known black gold reserves in Canada. And yeah, a big share of that oil comes with sand. More specifically, with Alberta's oil sands, which are one of the biggest sources of unconventional oil in the world, according to the province government, proven reserves of this sandy black gold stand at 165.4 billion barrels. Sounds like a blessing for the country? Yeah, definitely. But it's all pretty hard to get at, which is why these reserves are called unconventional. Regular so-called light oil is fluid, so its extraction usually means pumping it out with a pump. Sometimes this kind of oil can even flow to the surface on its own. Oil sands, on the other hand, contain bitumen. It's so thick, heavy, and sticky that it doesn't flow by itself, and you can't pump it out with regular pumps, so to get this kind of oil, you need to use different methods. This is 1985, and this is now 2015. This is what open pit mining looks like. That is, they first take the sand, which creates quarries, then they haul it to special plants where the sand gets separated from the bitumen. There's also mining using steam heating. In that case, steam is pumped down to the depth where the bitumen is, heating the surrounding oil-bearing rocks. The bitumen gets more fluid, and then they pump it up to the surface. Bitumen's also a type of oil that's different from light oil since it contains a lot of sulfur and other contaminants. That makes it tougher to refine. That is, to turn it into products like petrol or diesel. Plus, how do you pump such a viscous liquid through pipes? You basically can't. So to get bitumen moving through pipelines, they mix it with regular light oil. All this makes bitumen expensive to extract, but by definition cheaper to sell. Overall, 95% of the oil in Canada is problematic. Still, the main issue wasn't really that, but the heavy dependence on their southern neighbor. The states have been using oil actively for a long time, so for Canada, it was the perfect option. No need to ship black gold far away by sea. The U.S. shores are close and always in need of the resource. Getting it transported over land via pipelines and railways is really easy too. At the same time, the U.S. set up a large number of processing plants or refineries specifically designed for heavy, tricky oil like the kind they pull out in Canada. There are as many as 130 of these scattered across the whole country, and the 5 biggest refineries almost entirely process that sandy oil from Alberta, Canada. The situation is perfect. Everyone's happy. Canada sells, the U.S. buys and uses the oil for their own purposes. No serious logistics costs or problems. It all came down to the fact that by 2023, 97% of Canada's oil was going straight to their southern neighbor. Every single day, 3.8 million barrels crossed the border. You could say it's total export dependence. This exact factor led the U.S. to want to buy oil from Canada at a cheaper price. Well, what can you do? Canada has no alternative since all its capacity is busy shipping oil to the U.S. Check this out. The sandy oil from Alberta is a grade called Western Canadian Select, or WCS. The main grade of light American oil is West Texas Intermediate, or WTI. So in 2018, the U.S. was buying Canadian WCS at almost $50 a barrel less than WTI. In other years, the situation was a bit better, but the discount was still pretty big. On average, over the last 10 years, the discount was around $13 per barrel. Because of that, for example, between 2015 and 2019, Canada lost about $14 billion. Huge money that, honestly, you'd rather be making than just losing because of discounts. So Canada needed to look for other markets to sell its black gold. However, there was a problem: the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's the only way to get Alberta's oil to the coast of British Columbia, to Vancouver, and then ship it by sea. Its capacity was 300,000 barrels a day, and as you can guess from 97% of exports going to the U.S., most of Canada's oil was heading south with a big discount. Building a new pipeline to get access to new markets is way too expensive, so they decided to expand Trans Mountain to add new capacity that would allow more oil to be shipped. In 2019, after realizing how much money was lost, the project to expand Trans Mountain, or TRX for short, kicked off. The expansion meant building a parallel pipeline from Edmonton, Alberta to Burnaby near Vancouver. It might seem like laying a pipe next to an existing pipeline's easy since everything's already surveyed, checked, and so on. However, that didn't take away the challenges faced during the original Trans Mountain construction. They had to run the pipeline through mountains, and sometimes the workers were up over 3,300 feet above sea level. As you can imagine, it wasn't just about being there. They had to carry out pretty tricky tasks, too, like calling pipe segments to the right spots, then welding them together, all while dealing with the altitude conditions. Besides that, on one of the sites, they actually had to dig a tunnel through the mountain using a tunnel boring machine. Over the whole time, the machine dug out about 1.4 million cubic feet of soil, and the 400-foot machine finished the job pretty quickly in just 1.5 years. After that, they placed inside the tunnel what the sandy Canadian oil ran through later, along with various petroleum products and a lighter form of oil that Canada also has, but in limited amounts. These are three 30-inch pipelines that connect two terminals, the first one on the streets of Burnaby and the second at the West Ridge port, the final point of the whole expansion project. By the way, the port also had to be expanded along with the pipeline because it's a key element used to send out ships loaded with oil. Before construction started, the West Ridge terminal included the original single dock from the 1950s, which had been in use for almost 70 years. There was a lot of work involved to change this old-timer. In particular, the project reportedly required installing some of the longest and biggest steel tubular piles ever used in a marine project in British Columbia. Their diameter reached 7.5 feet, and their length was 239 feet. That said, you can't just stop the oil terminal and then build something new. Everything had to work exactly as it did without any construction. The team behind the Canadian Trans Mountain expansion project pulled this off. In the end, Canada got 3 new docks for loading ships, each able to handle watercraft of different sizes, from barges to Aframax tankers, a class of oil tankers with a dead weight of about 125,000 tons. So if before the terminal could load only 1 ship at a time, now it can handle 3. You have to admit, that's quite an expansion. The expanded Trans Mountain Pipeline was launched on May 1st, 2024. Its capacity increased from 300,000 barrels a day to 890,000 barrels a day, so the country now has the ability to ship 590,000 more barrels a day to new markets. Incredible numbers Canada has never seen before. At the same time, thanks to the expansion of the West Ridge terminal, loading oil tankers has become more efficient, which perfectly matches the pipeline's increased capacity. The whole project cost Canada 34 billion Canadian dollars, an incredible amount of money. However, now 2024 can definitely be called the year of the revolution in Canada's oil industry. Finally, the country has the chance to break free from total dependence on oil exports to the U.S. and make more money selling its black gold. At that time, many people might be wondering, where will Canadian oil go? What are these new markets? Less than a month after the expanded pipeline started running, everything became clear. On May 24, 2024, a tanker loaded with 550,000 barrels of Canadian oil left the West Ridge terminal and headed straight across the Pacific to China. In June, about 250,000 barrels of oil left the terminal in West Ridge every day headed for China. Canada had never traded volumes like that with anyone other than the U.S. before. Then there was a bit of a drop, which experts called a correction period. It lasted until October 2024. After that, tankers started running so hard that the previous record seemed small. In October 2024, more than 300,000 barrels of oil were shipped daily from Canada to China. How's the situation now? In March 2025, a new daily shipment record was set, 353,000 barrels. It's worth noting that they still couldn't get rid of the discount on their oil. China's also buying Canadian oil cheaper. However, in this case, the average discount's no longer $13 like when selling to the U.S., but $2 to $5 per barrel. At the same time, in some months, the discount even dropped to just $1 or $2 per barrel. Basically, trade with China just keeps growing. But how did the U.S. react to all this? After many years of big discounts, in May 2025, the states were buying Canadian oil with a record low discount of $9.15 per barrel. Maybe these numbers don't seem like much to some, but the chief economist at Alberta Central said in a report that in 2024, the pipeline expansion brought an extra $10 billion in revenue, which is like adding a 13th month of production to the year. And now the most important part. If in 2023, before the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion was finished, 97% of the oil was going to the states, then by 2024 that number dropped to 95%. Yeah, it doesn't seem like much, but before that the dependency had only been growing, and now for the first time it's gone down. Plus, don't forget the new pipeline has only been up and running for about a year. This is just the beginning. The only limitation right now is, again, the pipeline itself. It's not running at full capacity yet, but judging by the pace of trade, Trans Mountain will definitely hit its limit in the not-so-distant future. But Canada already has a plan for that, new infrastructure, which will require billions in investment. Well, it's not exactly new. Everything new is just, well, forgotten old. Maybe it's almost time for the Enbridge Northern Gateway to make a comeback. This is a 731-mile pipeline running from Bruderheim in Alberta to the coastal town of Kitimat in British Columbia. The project for this pipeline was proposed back in the mid-2000s, and it was actually active until 2016. The plan was for the pipeline to have two pipes with a total capacity of 525,000 barrels a day, carrying bitumen from the Athabasca oil sands in Alberta to a marine terminal, where it would be loaded onto oil tankers and shipped to Asia. At that, the terminal was supposed to be built as part of the project itself. It was supposed to include two tanker berths, one of which would serve very large crude tankers, and the other Suez Max-type tankers for transporting condensate. For that reason, the total cost of the project wasn't small, 7.9 billion Canadian dollars. Anyway, the cost doesn't matter that much since the project was shelved. Because of environmental, economic, social, and other reasons, it was opposed by an alliance of 6 indigenous nations, many municipalities, environmentalists, and critics of the oil sands themselves. And in 2016, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau officially rejected the Enbridge Northern Gateway plans. Now, in 2025, it'd be a mistake not to think about the canceled project, which would have sent another 525,000 barrels of oil a day to China and other countries. Another project that comes to mind right now is the Energy East pipeline, canceled back in 2017 with a price tag of 16 billion Canadian dollars. It's 2,860 miles in length, 70% of which would have used an existing pipeline, were meant to carry oil from Alberta all the way to New Brunswick and possibly even to Quebec. Its capacity was supposed to be 1.1 million barrels of crude oil per day. That's quite a lot. But in 2017, the project got scrapped too, for the same reason. Lots of people weren't happy about it. So yeah, everyone unhappy about these pipelines is in for another round of long talks, because right now Canada really needs new capacity to move even further away from the US and toward other markets. We talked a lot today about selling Canadian oil to China, about how Canada's ready to ramp up capacity for that, but does China even want it? Well, let's take a look. The country keeps developing, which takes a lot of oil, at least until it switches to renewable energy sources. When will that happen? No one really knows, but judging by China's plans, they aim to hit full carbon neutrality by 2060. Till then, it needs loads of oil. As of 2023, China's the world's biggest importer of black gold, bringing in over 11 million barrels of oil per day. It's needed to turn into still essential fuels like gasoline, kerosene, and diesel. Oil's also key for making plastic and all kinds of lubricants, crucial stuff we just can't ditch yet. And in case of a crisis, or maybe some kind of disaster, China's stockpiling black gold. And that's not all. Right now, China can't actively buy oil from its main supplier, Russia. It's because of the sanctions imposed on its neighbor. Beijing's worried about getting hit with secondary sanctions. And right on cue, a new active exporter shows up, Canada, a country China can trade with without worrying about serious restrictions. For now, Canada is the perfect partner for China in this situation, and that's not likely to change anytime soon. One proof is the Haixing Strategic Reserve Facility, a Chinese storage with a capacity of 18 million barrels, which in 2024 was fully dedicated to Canadian oil. So Canada-China oil ties are hardly a short-term thing, and everyone's happy about it. Well, except the U.S. First of all, it's worth saying that the states under no circumstances will be happy about their closest neighbor and historically important trading partner turning to China, their main rival on the world stage. That means losing importance for the partner and strengthening the rival's influence, a combo that definitely isn't good news for the U.S. But you know what's interesting? China actually used to buy oil from the U.S. For example, during almost all of 2018, China imported 247,000 barrels per day from the States. Then certain troubles began, and by the first quarter of 2019, the flow of oil from the U.S. to China dropped to 80,000 barrels per day. Recently, with Trump taking office as U.S. president, a new round of trade war kicked off, which hit the oil relations between the countries even harder. And right here, the expanded Trans Mountain comes in very handy. China can easily handle all the threats from the U.S. There's a new partner, thanks to whom, in April 2025, they managed to smoothly cut imports from the States down to just 45,000 barrels per day. And it's unlikely China will have any trouble lowering shipments from the U.S. even more. Canada still isn't using the full capacity of its pipeline. All of this, of course, doesn't go unnoticed by the U.S. because cutting oil shipments means losing money. Add to that the reduction of the discount on Canadian oil, and you get that overall the U.S. is losing a whole lot of dollars. But the U.S. can still send oil to other markets instead of China, right? Well, so far it's not working out. In the first quarter of 2025, American crude storage on the Gulf Coast hit 320 million barrels, the highest level since 2017. So basically, there's nowhere to put the oil. But for sure, the U.S. is looking for a solution to the problem. Will they get it done? We'll find out in a few years.